The Deadly Exorcism of Kennedy Ife, When Faith Turned Fatal Part the Front. The Beginning of a Descent. It was a warm, unremarkable summer in London in August 2016 when the Ife family's world unraveled into a tragic, haunting story that would soon grip the nation. At the center of this calamity was Kennedy Ife, a 26-year-old man with a bright future and a loving family. The Ifes were a devout Nigerian Christian family living in the Wood Green neighborhood. To outsiders, they were an ordinary household grounded in faith, unity, and tradition. Kennedy was the fourth of 7 sons, well-educated and working as a trainee at his father's business. He had no criminal record, no known history of violence, and was, by most accounts, gentle and kind. But in the weeks leading up to his death, something changed. It began subtly, a persistent pain in his throat that doctors couldn't quite diagnose. Despite several visits, no underlying cause could be determined. He grew increasingly distressed, complaining that something was not right inside him. Then came the nightmare no one could have foreseen. Kennedy began insisting that there was a python coiled inside his body, wrapped around his internal organs, slowly suffocating him from within. His speech turned erratic. He began making disturbing declarations that he had to mutilate himself to set himself free, that he was cursed, that something evil had latched onto him. His family, rooted in strong Pentecostal beliefs, began to suspect what their religious upbringing had taught them to fear. Demonic Possession, Part 2. The Possession. Kennedy's father, Kenneth Ife, was a charismatic pastor and deeply respected in his community. The Ifes didn't turn to mental health professionals for guidance. They turned to prayer. Kennedy's behavior escalated rapidly. He started speaking in tongues, pacing for hours and making guttural noises that frightened even his closest siblings. One evening, in a particularly frenzied state, he physically attacked his father during a prayer session, forcing the rest of the family to intervene. That moment solidified their belief. This was not mental illness. This was spiritual warfare. From that point forward, their mission was clear: save Kennedy's soul. The Ife household was transformed into a site of fervent, relentless prayer. The family, all 7 brothers and their parents, took shifts, forming a vigil around Kennedy. They banned outsiders, believing outside interference would weaken their spiritual fight. The curtains were drawn, and what happened behind closed doors became a grim secret. Kennedy was restrained with cable ties and handcuffs to a bed in his room. Over the course of 3 days, the family withheld food and water from him, believing that starvation would weaken the demonic entity inside. They played gospel music constantly, poured anointing oil over his body, and chanted prayers, some in English, others in their native Yoruba. At times, Kennedy's screams were described as inhuman, guttural, layered, as if more than one voice were speaking through him. The family believed this to be the demon manifesting itself, but neighbors would later report hearing strange noises, banging, and cries of agony. The youngest brother, Roy, kept a journal during the ordeal. In it, he documented every prayer, every manifestation, every moment Kennedy appeared to return to his senses, only to be taken again. They believed they were making progress, that they were close to saving him. But Kennedy's body was telling a different story. Part 3. The Final Hours. By the 3rd day of the exorcism, August 31st, 2016, Kennedy's physical state had deteriorated dramatically. He had been restrained without food or water, his muscles stiff from being bound. His skin was marked with bruises from struggling against the ties. His breathing grew shallow. His screams weakened into whispers. That morning, something changed. Kennedy fell silent. The family, not recognizing the signs of extreme dehydration and exhaustion, believed the demon had finally left him. But when they tried to revive him and found his body cold and unresponsive, panic set in. Paramedics were finally called. When emergency services arrived at the Ife home, they found a deeply unsettling scene. A young man's lifeless body, bound, bruised, and pale, lying in a cluttered room filled with Bibles, gospel CDs, and containers of anointing oil. Despite attempts to resuscitate him, Kennedy Ife was declared dead at the scene. The police immediately launched an investigation. The family was arrested, The media erupted. Part 4. The trial. The public reaction was a mix of disbelief, outrage, and horror. The case of Kennedy Ife, a seemingly normal man who had been restrained, starved, and subjected to a violent exorcism by his own family, shook the nation. It was a case that raised uncomfortable questions about faith, mental health, and cultural beliefs in modern Britain. Kenneth Ife and his sons were charged with manslaughter, false imprisonment, and causing or allowing the death of a vulnerable adult. The defense maintained that they had acted out of love and desperation, driven by the sincere belief that Kennedy had been possessed. Medical experts testified that Kennedy likely experienced a severe psychotic episode, potentially triggered by an undiagnosed mental illness such as schizophrenia, or perhaps exacerbated by the use of cannabis. But due to the delay in calling medical professionals, his exact condition could never be confirmed. The prosecution argued that Kennedy's death was entirely preventable. If he had received psychiatric care instead of religious rituals, he might still be alive. The court heard how Kennedy had begged for help, even at times pleading for an exorcism to end, indicating moments of lucidity within his delusional state. But those pleas were interpreted by his family as demonic resistance. In 2019, after a grueling legal process, all the defendants were acquitted of manslaughter. The court acknowledged that while the family had acted wrongly, their intentions were not malicious. The judge described the case as a tragedy of truly terrible proportions, but the acquittal did little to soothe public anger or the deep scars left by Kennedy's death. Part 5. The aftermath and the lessons. Unlearned. The tragedy sparked national debate. Mental health advocates called for better education around psychiatric illness, especially in immigrant communities where stigma, fear, and cultural interpretation often keep families from seeking help. In the Nigerian Christian diaspora, the case created sharp divisions. Some clung to the belief that Kennedy had indeed been possessed, citing similar cases and testimonies. Others, including former church members, admitted that cultural attitudes toward mental illness needed to change. That prayer alone was not always enough. Kennedy's story has become a grim reminder of how good intentions, when clouded by fear, ignorance, and spiritual absolutism, can lead to fatal outcomes. His death was not at the hands of strangers or violent criminals. It came at the hands of those who loved him most. A chilling truth that only deepened the tragedy. The case raised profound questions. When does religious freedom cross into abuse? Can cultural practices that endanger life be tolerated under the banner of tradition? And how many more Kennedys are suffering in silence? Their illness misread as sin, their symptoms dismissed as spiritual attacks? Mental health professionals stress that the signs of psychosis, delusions, hallucinations, paranoia are treatable with early intervention. Kennedy might have benefited from antipsychotic medication, therapy, and hospitalization. Instead, he was treated as a battlefield for good and evil. A soul to be saved, not a patient to be healed. Part 6. A haunting legacy. Today, the Ife home in Wood Green stands as a painful symbol, not just of what happened, but of what could have been prevented. There is no memorial, no plaque, no visible mark of what occurred there. But the echoes of Kennedy's cries, captured in police recordings and neighbor testimonies, still haunt those who followed the case. The Ife family has largely retreated from public life. Though legally acquitted, they live under the heavy shadow of public scrutiny and private grief. Some still believe they did the right thing. Others, perhaps in quieter moments, may question what they might have done differently. Kennedy's death is now studied in criminology, theology, and psychiatry courses across the UK. His name has become shorthand for the dangers of spiritual extremism in the face of mental illness. But he was not a symbol in life. He was a son, a brother, a friend, a young man crying out for help in a language no one understood until it was too late. Final reflections. The story of Kennedy. Ife is not merely a horror tale of possession gone wrong. It is a mirror to society, reflecting how the intersection of faith, fear, and misunderstanding can produce irreversible consequences. It urges communities to re-examine how they view mental illness and to consider how easily compassion can be misdirected when veiled in spiritual zealotry. It forces us to ask hard questions. Are we equipped to distinguish the cries of the mentally ill from cries of the possessed? Do we protect the vulnerable? Or do we sometimes become their jailers, not with cruelty, but with conviction? The tragedy is not only that Kennedy Ife died, it's that he might have lived, if only someone had listened with a different kind of faith.